Okay. Boker Tov, everybody. Today's daf is Mem 40, and we're in the middle of a nice, fun sugya on. Is this working? Hold on. Sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah, I guess so. All right, and we're in the middle of a nice sugya on what do you call it? On Bikur Cholim, and now we continue here. I'm just sorry. I don't know if this is working. I'm starting this again. All right, fine. All right, so today's daf is daf mem, and we're in the middle of the whole discussion about Bikur Cholim, because the whole question is somebody who's mud or hana, can he go ahead and do Bikur Cholim for somebody else? And we pick up about on Lamed Tet Bet, just two lines actually down on the wide lines. Okay, time we turn to the brisa. Bikur Cholim ein la shir. There is no limit to Bikur Cholim. My ein la shir. What does it mean? There's no limit. Some of Yosef Lememas or Yosef thought that it meant ein shir l'matan schara, that the reward for doing Bikur Cholim is limitless. So the Gemara says, Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said to him, V'chol mitzvah mi yesh la shir, and how about all other mitzvahs? Does that mean to suggest that Bikur Cholim is unique? All other mitzvahs, since when do other mitzvahs have a limit to the amount of reward that one gets for performing them? Mi yesh la shir, l'matan schara v'hatzanan, we turn to Mishnah, be as zealous or as scrupulous by a light mitzvah as by a heavy mitzvah. You don't know the amount of reward for the various mitzvot. So, I mean, presumably the point being, maybe it's possible that some mitzvot are more than others and some mitzvot are endless the amount of reward, but to highlight that by Bikur Cholim would suggest that that's not true by others, and we don't know. Maybe there are many other mitzvahs also in that category. Again, it's not exactly clear what the objection is. Maybe it's true. Maybe there are other mitzvahs that are in that category, but maybe specifically Bikur Cholim is one of them. Anyway, so the Gemara continues. Elam Rabbi, so rather Rabbi says, Afilu gadol eitzel katan, ein la shir, meaning in terms of like quantifying and measuring things, even if somebody is a important person, you should not say, well, you know what, this guy, he's like a lower class guy. I'll let people from his strata of society go visit him. It's not my honor to go ahead and visit him. No, even a gadol eitzel katan, somebody that's very, of a very high status should go and do a Bikur Cholim call to anybody, even somebody who is in society seen of as a lower status. You see this, I don't know about Bikur Cholim, you see this during Shiva calls, that people was like, like somebody who might be, somebody nobody knows or whatever, and then some, really important person comes and pays a visit because I knew your mother back when or whatever, people don't feel like, oh, I can't pay a Shiva call, like I'm too chashuv for this person, so that's actually a very positive thing, and the Gemara is saying it here too in terms of, in terms of Bikur Cholim. So the Gemara says, where were we? Gadol eitzel katan. Okay, Rava is another interpretation. Afilu mea pamim bayom. Don't say, check, did my Bikur Cholim call for the day, don't have to go back again. If somebody is sick and nobody is visiting them and they need human contact, I mean, before we're going to get to this other aspects of Bikur Cholim in terms of just taking care of a person's need and so on, but first of all, the basic one is just the human contact. So if a person needs it, you can't just give yourself a pat on the back and feel you've been yosei your chiyuv, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to go 100 times, but if it's needed and nobody else is doing it, then you're not done just because you did it once. Yeah.
There are many sick people.
I guess it could mean that too, right? That even if there are many sick people, you're not yotzei by going to one person. I was sort of thinking about like the way this is used in like, hashev teshivim afilu mea pa'amim, or no, hakem takimi mo afilu mea, afilu mea pa'amim. So it's like multiple times, even with the same type of, of doing the same thing, literally the same thing multiple times. Amar Rabbi Yacha bar Chanina, kol mevakar chola notel echad mishishim b'tzara, or some have b'chelyav. Okay, anybody who visits a sick person takes away 1/60th of the person's illness. So you create a partial healing for the person. One also wonders, are you taking it away because you're taking it upon yourself? But anyway, I think there's a little ambiguity about that. But it's not it. But anyway, it does say you're taking away 1/60th of his anguish or of his sickness.
Here is bitzara, not mitzara, which would be different. In other words, you're not taking it away from him. You're just getting, the tzara yourself.
Yeah, interesting. But that's not But that's not going to be how the Gemara is going to continue to read it. So let's take a look. Okay, and you will see that there's a gift on the side because it may chel yav. Okay. So the Gemara says Amile. So Amala in Cain Leulin Shitin Velukma. So why didn't 60 people just visit him and then he'll get better? So Amale. So he said to him, Ki isu reyaisa debei Rabbi, like the meiser, like the 10th of the house of Rabbi. We'll see what that means in a minute. Uba ben Gilo. And anyway, this is only true by somebody who's of the ben Gilo, literally like of his age, but means somehow of his mazel, somehow from the same whatever, I don't know astrology, but somehow from the same mazel that has some effect that you're able to help by some type of a sympathetic healing or something, sympathetic, like being sort of in sync with this person, remove some of his pain.
Okay. The 60 men around Shlomo.
Oh, Shishim Giburim Saviv La. Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so the Gemara says, Titania, we thought of Brisa, Rebbe Omer. So what's this Meiser debate, Rebbe? Rebbe Omer, Batan Izonis Minich Seachim. If a daughter is supported, getting us back to Ksuvas, from the brother's property, no tell us Easter Nechasim, when she comes to get married, so there she is, the father died, she's being supported by the estate, it's time for her to get married, she gets a 10th of the estate. So Amrulo, that's her assumed to be dowry. So Amrulo the Rebbe, they said to Rebbe, Lidvarecha Mishe Shoeser Banot Uben Einlo. So somebody has 10 daughters and doesn't have a son. Uben, excuse me. Somebody has 10 daughters and a son. Does that mean the son doesn't inherit anything? Because you have to give away to each daughter 1/10 of the estate when they get married, and there'll be no inheritance left. Is that really true? Amar Lahen, he said back to them, Rishona no tell us Isur Nechasim. The first one takes a 10th of what's present. Vishniya, and the second one, B'mashashira, takes a 10th of what remains afterwards. Shlishis, and the third, B'mashashira, takes a 10th of what remains after the first two. Okay, so therefore, it's not a 10th of the original estate, it's a 10th of what is left. So I don't know, you can do the math. What will that be if you have 10 people, each one takes a 10th? I'm sure there's some simple math equation to automatically figure that out. I don't know what it is. Anyway, okay, so that's all good if they get married one after the other. What if they all get married on the same day? So then maybe they all take a 10th of the current estate, and maybe in that case the son will lose out. And he says, no, even that's not true. Even if it's all on the same day, you figure out what would it have been if they went sequentially, what would be the total amount that it would have taken away from the estate if they had gone sequentially, and then you divide it equally amongst all 10 if they get married on the same day. So you get it if they get married on different days, the first one to get married actually gets a bigger amount. But if all 10 get married on the same day, you figure out what that would have been if it were sequential, and you divide it equally. And that's the same if 60 people, right? If I say, well, 60 people, one after another, it won't get the guy better because each one will remove a 60th of what's left. Or what if all 60 people go at the same time? That should work. No, it'll work the same way. We'll figure it out what it would be sequential. We'll divide it. All right, so anyway. Rav Chelbo, and even that only works when it's a ben kilo. So Rav Chelbo, what?
It gets pretty better.
Yeah, it does slowly, right. Now Rav Chelbo Chalash. Rav Chelbo got ill. Nozik Achri's Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana went out and made an announcement. You see, the idea of making announcements was a long-standing behavior. He went out and he, like a show announcement. Okay, put it in the Beaker Cholim box in the show announcement. Rav Chelbo boyish, and the announcement was Rav Chelbo is sick. Lo ikatakasi, but nobody came to visit him. The announcement didn't do any good. Amar Lahu, he went and he said to the people, 1 minute, don't you guys know this story of one of the students of Rabbi Akiva? Shechala, he got sick. Nobody came and visited him. Rabbi Akiva himself came to visit him. That's again the Gadol Eitz Katan. And because he he honored him and he swept up in front of him. So chaya. So he was brought back to life. How does it translate kivdo? By the way, does it mean honor him, or does it mean to clean the house? Because lechabeda tabayit, it probably says to clean the house, right? What does it say there in your English?
They swept the floor.
Well, there's two verbs here. What does it say other than swept?
The floor and settled the dust.
Settle the dust, right. So they're explaining keep it abayis. That's what I assume, not honored. Okay, so because he swept and cleaned up, Chaya, he was resuscitated. He was brought back to life. Took care of some very basic needs. So Amalei is Rebbe Hechiyitani. He said to him, Rebbe, you have brought me back to life. Yatsa Rebbe Akiva Darash, and as a result, Rebbe Akiva went out and expounded and taught. Anybody who does not visit the sick is like they are spilling blood, because the visiting of the sick, gives them life. Now, it's attending to the needs, but it's not just attending to the needs. Attending to the needs also, right, through human contact, and what that means that somebody is there taking care of you is also obviously at the sort of emotional, psychological level, also very important. So anyway, if you don't do it, you are, you're not helping in this person's recovery. So it's as though you are culpable for this person's illness, and if the person dies. So he asked Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, by the way, so that was the end of what of Rav Kahana. He gave everybody Musar, but you notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that then they all went to they all listened and then they went to do a Bikur Cholim call to Rav Chelbo. This was the Musar. Okay, whether it actually was successful in motivating people is a different question. Now, Kiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar, he said, Kol Mevakar Chola Gorim Lo Sheyichyeh. Anybody who visits the sick person, helps him, brings him back to life. Anybody who doesn't visit a sick person, actually causes him to die. So the Gemara says, my grama, what do you mean causes? It's anybody who visits the sick person will pray for him that he will be brought to life. And anybody who doesn't visit the sick person will praise for him that he'll die. Is that really true? That somebody who doesn't visit him prays for him to die? Who would pray for him to die? Ella, no, the problem is just the passivity, that anybody who doesn't visit isn't praying for him to get better or to get worse. But even though he's not praying for him to get worse, he's also not praying for him to get better, which means he's basically not concerned with this person's welfare. And therefore, even though he's not actively doing anything to hurt him, the passive lack of helping him to get any better makes him culpable if this person actually gets worse. Now, of course, what's interesting is the shift of gears, right? The statement, the Rabbi Akiva statement would have us thinking in very practical terms, right, about taking care of the needs. Even the earlier statement about Notel Echad Michel Yav, okay, it's still not about prayer. It's about something maybe, a little metaphysical, right? But it's still not about prayer. And then the whole shift that it's about, whether you pray or you don't pray for the person. It's quite fascinating how, I don't know the answer, why the Stam of the Gemara completely sort of shifted it to be about prayer. But it still winds up making the same statement. You're there, you're taking care of the person one way or another by praying, taking care of the needs, the emotional connection. You're helping them get better. You're not there, you're not actively hurting them, but you're passively not helping them, and therefore you're culpable. It's sort of like the Gemara that says, anybody who is Eino Osek B'Pir Vrivya, Kilu Shofech Damim, right? It's as if they spill blood because they're not bringing new life into the world. So the passive non-helping, if you're not helping, you're hurting, then it's actually like seeing like you're contributing to the person getting worse. Now there's a fascinating Ran here. That's Pshat of the Gemara. And then, okay, that's another nice Gemara about Bikur Cholim. But there's a fascinating Ran here that's very, very important in discussions of medical ethics, which you would not have expected at all from this related to this Gemara. Let's take a look at the Ran on the top of the page. He says, near Beinai Dahachi Kamar. It seems to me that this is what the Gemara is getting at. There actually are times where you should be praying for someone to die. To go into like somebody is in a lot of pain and suffering, and they are terminal. Okay, there's no hope for recovery. They're in a lot of pain and suffering. The best you could want for this person is that they should pass easily, right? And that it should not be a prolonged period of dying and suffering. Rebbe's maidservant saw that multiple times that, in a short period of time, he had to go to the bathroom, and he would be moaning, tefillin, and he would then have to put his film back on, become itztaer, and he wasn't suffering. Amran, she said, may it be the will that the upper spheres are victorious over the lower, because all the Talmidim were praying that Rebbe would live. Those were the lower spheres, and it's clear that up in heaven it was his time to die. So she actually prayed that he should just be able to die naturally, and his death shouldn't be prolonged by the prayers of the students. So effectively, she was praying that he should die. That somebody who comes and visits is helping the person could even help the person get brought to life. Because the prayer, not just the person knows what is needed, but the prayers in the presence of the person will be more effective. And if you don't visit him, not only will your prayers not help the person get better, if that's a possibility, even if the prayer was not that he should get better, even if the prayer was a more humble prayer, that it should be a simple passing, that he should be able to just die sooner and without pain and without suffering. Even that little bit, your prayers won't work. So it's a very fascinating run, right? He says, when we talk about praying to die, like, what does the Gemara talking about praying to die? So it's actually saying, yeah, there are times you want to be praying for somebody to die, that it's somebody's time and the person is suffering, and you just want to pray that they should have that it shouldn't be prolonged, and that should happen, quickly and naturally. So, and he's saying, sometimes even those prayers aren't heard, right? Like if somebody is really like terminal or whatever, like a prayer for recovery is like, what are you praying for? Like recovery isn't a possibility, but you sometimes pray for a gentle and for a passing, and sometimes unfortunately even that isn't heard, and the person it's prolonged. So that's, I think, very
formal.
I don't know for that. I don't know. But maybe you could just use a Rebbe's maidservant one. He writes on Yomi or something.
Sure. Together, right. the visiting, right, with the prayer part.
Right. Well, that's the Gemara did. He's working with the Gemara.
Right. But now he's really linking them together.
Right. But this is very important because in all these discussions, of course, about what's it called, DNR, and do you do heroic measures, and how much do you try to use medical interventions to slow down a natural death? And a lot of the early material. I mean, there's very little in the Gemara about these end-of-life issues. We developed a whole big halachic system based on very few little hints in the Gemara. But anyway, a very important distinction is between, you want to prolong, you want to prolong life. You don't want to prolong death. So therefore, you don't want to interrupt a natural process of dying, right? But the balancing, the issue about prolonging life as opposed to interrupting and stretching out a natural process of dying, right? And how to draw those lines. But that's an important guiding sort of principle around deciding when to do various interventions. So the Ran says it very beautifully. Sometimes it's the time to die, and the most we can hope for is to not stand in the way, and hope that goes, as quickly and as painlessly as possible.
The Gemara doesn't discuss the personal autonomy in this area.
No. The personal, that's another fascinating discussion about medical ethics, which is Rav Moshe Feinstein found like a backdoor way to bring in personal autonomy. Because, most of the discussion is it's not our body, it's God's body. We don't get to decide. So maybe there's a discussion about personal autonomy in cases where there is a Gemara that sort of sounds like it, that if a person is chayisha, if a person is terminal, do they have to do certain types of procedures it's a similar question, but they might not have a chiyuv, the v'chayv behem or whatever, which obligates you to save life and preserve life and so on. Does that obligate you to do certain types of medical procedures that might extend life for a brief period of time, but will involve a lot of risk and involve suffering and so on? So there actually is a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that's used about that actually seems to indicate you would have a certain degree of autonomy. But other types of areas, it's less clear. But Rav Moshe finds a sort of backdoor way to bring it in by sort of saying, like, when person's wishes are not met, that can create an enormous amount of, angst, exactly, and not only suffering, but angst or whatever that can even more complicate the person's medical condition. So he's always inclined to weigh in favor of the person's will by the presumption that doing something against the will would be even more counterproductive. So that's how Rav Moshe works it in. But the problem you have is, well, what if the person is completely unconscious and in a coma? You can't make that argument anymore. So yeah, all very interesting questions.
And try to read the idea of goses into that.
The
against interfering with
with somebody when they were goses. Yeah, I mean, but the goses is is not just terminal. Goses is like very much like in the active process of dying, So, all right. So the Gemara says like this. Okay, Rava Yom Kadma the Chalish. Rava on the first day he got sick. Amar Lahon, he said to people that knew him, his friends, Lo tiglu le'inchi. Don't tell people that I'm sick. To lo litra mazle, that it shouldn't be an ayin hara. My mazel should not be made bad. So people find out, and maybe it reinforces the fact that I'm sick, and as long as it's not a public matter, so maybe it'll pass quickly or whatever. But somehow the fact that people find out about it makes it more of a reality, seems to be the idea. Mikan ve'elach, but once he was sick for more than a day, so he saw it wasn't passing quickly. Amar Lahon, he said to people, it's like people don't want to tell people they're pregnant yet or whatever, other types of things, right? I mean, there's other practical reasons also, but okay, anyway. So anyway, the first day he didn't want to tell. Once it was clear that it was there to stay, he said, Amalon, puku v'achrizu b'shuka, go and announce it in the marketplace. Why? Why should we now announce it? To hold a sunny li, because people that hate me, lichtuli, they'll be happy that I'm sick. Okay, why is that a good thing? And it says, "Bin follow vechal tismach." Don't rejoice when your enemies fall, when your enemies stumble, when they fall down. Now, what does that have to do? What he's saying, like, they'll do a sin because they'll be happy about me. So the real key is the end of the pasuk. It says v'gomer, and if you look at the side, it quotes in the right hand margin. Do you have this in your right hand margin? The end of the pasuk? It's in my Gemara. No, it says, "Ubikishlo al yageli becha," and in his stumbling, do not let your heart rejoice. Pen yira Hashem, lest God see you rejoicing about your enemy's downfall. And the end of the pasuk is, "Veheshiv me'alav apo," and therefore God will remove His anger from your enemy, because God will be more angry at you that you're happy about what happened to your enemy. So therefore, Rabbi says, let them be happy that I'm sick. If they're happy that I'm sick, that would mean that God will focus on them and take away His anger from me, and I'll get better. Okay, so people that are happy, that'll be good for me. And people that love me, then they'll pray for me. So either way, I'm going to win out. They'll either pray for me or they'll be happy that I'm sick, and then that'll also help. Okay, by the way, it's fascinating, right? Because Rava, you would expect somebody to open up a statement by saying, and people that hate me, this is what's going to happen. So the reality is, what's his name at YU has done a lot of work on Rava. Dr. Elman, Rava had a lot of people that hated him in Mechuzah because it was a cosmopolitan city, and he basically was a very, strong rabbi who told people when they were doing sins, and they didn't lie. He had a lot of headache from his community. So therefore, he's saying he knows that there are going to be people that are going to be very happy that he's sick. All right. So now the Gemara continues. What?
That virginary process, Hashem will be.
Well, exactly. Or in order to get back at this person for being happy, God will make make the other guy better. Anyway, but it just also shows you that nothing has changed. Okay, even rabbis like Rava had a lot of politics and headache. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: Amarav. Anybody who visits the sick person is saved from the punishment of Gehenim. Ashrei maskil el dal. Praise is the one that puts his attention to the dal. Now, and the dal normally means the poor, but it could also mean the poor in health, to the sick. B'yom ra'ayim l'tei Hashem, and the day of evil, God will save him. Ein dal el chola, and the dal, the downtrodden, the poor, is the sick person. Shenemar midala yivtzeini. From being downtrodden, God will save me. Inami, or it says mina denkra from the following pasuk. Madua ata kachadal ben hamelech baboker. Why are you so downtrodden or whatever, poor, the son of the king, every single morning? Somehow, but we're supposed to understand that makes it clear that they were sick. I don't know. Ein ra'ah, what? Well, it doesn't mean he was poor, so it must mean by poor in spirit, I suppose. Right. And ein ra'ah ela gehenim. And evil means Gehenim. All God does is for God's sake. Even the wicked person who is like designated for the day of evil. So God created Gehenim for the wicked. That's what it means. Kopa al Hashem. God created it. V'im bakar, be care, and if you do visit the sick person, mascharo, what will be your reward? So the Gemara says, mascharo, what will be your reward? Kedama, you just told us. You'll be saved from Gehenim. Isn't that enough? Ella maschara b'lamazeh. No, it's not enough. What are you going to get rewarded in this world? So the following pasuk: Hashem yishmereyu v'yichyeyu. God will preserve you and give you life. Va'osher ba'aretz, and wealth or goodness in the land. V'al titneu b'nefesh oivav, and will not give you over to the soul of your enemies. So Hashem yishmereyu, God will protect you. Miyetzer hara, from the evil inclination. V'yichyehu, and give you life. Mina yisurin, from anguish. The Maharsha sort of points out that each one of these corresponds to how you help the sick person. So sort of the Yetzer hara. I forget what he says about the Yetzer hara, but anyway, maybe the Yetzer hara not to go visit the sick person, and you chose to do the right thing, and God will yichyehu, right? Meaning yisurin, because you were helping a sick person that was suffering. Va'osher ba'aretz, and happiness in the land. Everybody should give you honor and respect. And so the Maharsha points out that goes back to the idea that afilu gadol eitzel katan, right? That people come even, to show, even people of a higher social standing will come and visit the sick person. The al titneu b'nefesh oivav, and not give you over to the soul of your enemies. So why doesn't it just say your enemies? So to tell you, she's damnu lo re'im ki Naaman, you'll get friends like Naaman had friends, sheribu at tzarato, that they helped him cure himself from his tzaraat. Right, and again, notice you have friends who help you with your problems, which is the whole what Bikur Cholim is about. You're a friend, and you're helping the person. You're there for the person when he has problems, and specifically when he's got illness. The al yizdamnu lo re'im ki rechavam, and not friends like rechavam. This is, by the way, why the Maharsha says it says nefesh, because it's about not just it's about the connection that you have to your friends, and their advice, so you won't have friends like rechavam. That they did him no good. That they actually led to their advice caused the whole kingdom to be divided. Tanya. So now we're going to talk about Rechavam a little bit, about what it means to have friends. With friends like this, who needs enemies, type of a thing. That's like the Nefesh Oivav, friends who really are enemies. Okay, Tanya. We've done a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Im yomu elcha yiladim b'nei. If children tell you to build, uzakenim sator, and elders tell you to destroy something, shmal uzakenim b'al tishma yiladim. Listen to the elders, don't listen to the kids. Shebinyan yiladim stira. The building of minors ultimately is a destruction. Stirat zakenim, and the destruction of elders, binyan, is ultimately a building. Meaning, so even if their advice looks, some advice on the surface looks positive, and other advice on the surface looks negative, trust in the wisdom of elders, because things that might look attractive, if it's coming from those that lack the wisdom, ultimately can come to hurt you and could come to be even more, counterproductive, and the same in the reverse. Okay, and the simon is Rechavam, because he listened to the young people who said, increase the tax on the people, and ultimately it led to the destruction, to the tearing apart of the kingdom, and maybe one could even eventually the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but minimally to the tearing apart of the kingdom. And what the elders were saying, which were saying, go easy on the people. Maybe that's seen as like a stira, like you are loosening your reins of power, you're loosening your income, you're going easy, you're not taxing them, and so on. Ultimately, that would have helped, the government and the kingdom much more. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Sheisha Braid Rav Idi Lo lisod inish katsira. A person should not visit. This is an interesting Aramaic word here. Lisod, which is like a poked. A person should not visit. Katsira. Katsira is an Aramaic word for choleh. Okay, I don't know exactly why, but anyway, if it comes from what if katsar to cut, I'm not sure where it comes from. But anyway, a person should not visit a sick person. Lo b'tlas shai kadmaisa, not in the first 3 hours of the day. Lo b'tlas shai basraisa, not in the last 3 hours of the day. The yoma of the day. Ki echido lisachtaite, min rachmet, that he should not. That it should not, make him despair of praying for the person. Why would it make him despair of praying for the person? Because the first 3 hours, Rav Kadate, the person actually, people feel like better in the morning. They have a burst of energy. So you'll say, oh, he's not doing so bad. He looked pretty up and about. He looked pretty healthy to me. So you won't pray for him as much. But so the last 3 hours, Takif Chushe, is when he's at his worst. So you'll say, what's going to do good to pray for him? He's clearly at death's door. So therefore, get him when he's in the middle, so you'll feel properly motivated to pray for him. Again, it's interesting that it focuses on, the prayer as a core part of what the Bikur Cholim is about. Because one could say if the Bikur Cholim is really about being there for the person and supporting them and so on, then the last 3 hours of the day, Dafka, is maybe when he most needs you, right? And he most needs that type of support that you can offer. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: Amarav. How do you know that God feeds the sick person? Presumably reflecting the idea that when people are sick, often are not very hungry and don't need, and don't want a lot of food. So who's sustaining them during that time if they're not eating so much? God is. Shenemar, as it says, Hashem yisa'adenu al eres davai. God will support him on the bed of anguish, so of suffering. So God is the one, and from the word su'udah, lis'od could be to support, but also from the word si'udah. So God is the one that is feeding and that is sustaining the person. How do you know that God's presence hovers above the sick person? The verse says, Hashem yisadenu al eres davai. So God supports him. So somehow support here is maybe understood to mean like not just su'udah of like the su'udah, but to literally support. So somehow it's not exactly clear, but some of that means that God is at the head of the bed, supporting maybe the head of the person. Tanya Namihachi, we taught similarly. So if somebody comes to visit the sick person, don't sit on a couch, which is what the mita was, one of those Roman couches. V'lo al gabi safsal, or on a stool, v'lo al gabi kisei, or a chair. But sit on the ground. Because the divine presence is above the head of the cholah, so you should not be sitting equal to where the divine presence is. You need to be at a lower level. Okay. So that was the end for now of this very nice long passage. It's not the only place where the Gemara talks about Bikur Cholim. Very powerful passages in the beginning of Brachos, if you remember, about Yisurin Shel Ava, where it talks about people visiting people, and there's a lot of Gemaras about Bikur Cholim. Okay, so now we turn though to a different point, which has nothing to do with Bikur Cholim and nothing to do with Nedarim, but is because we had a statement in the name of Ravin Amarav. Who was it? Ravin Amarav. We have another statement of his, and this is paralleled in another Gemara. The Amar Ravin Amarav says Ravin in the name of Rav. Mitra b'ma'arava. If there's rain in Eretz Yisrael, Sada Rabba Prat. The big testimony to the fact that there was rain in Eretz Yisrael is the Euphrates. When the Euphrates is going very high on the banks and it's like rushing water, so it's clear that what was happening was that there was heavy rain in Israel and that fed into the Euphrates. Now, not exactly clear why it's Daf Eretz Yisrael. There's a lot of places that might feed rain into the Euphrates. The Mefarshim say it's the assumption that Eretz Yisrael is higher than the other lands, so it's going to run down or run off into the Euphrates. Anyway, but that means when we see here in Bavel that the Euphrates is high, we know that it was very rainy in Israel. Now, this actually becomes significant halachically. Upliga de Shmuel, this argues on Shmuel. Damar Shmuel, Nara river mekefe mitbarich, is blessed from its bedrock, which means that apparently, right, rivers. Where does I should have looked this up ahead of time? But where do like rivers and lakes come from if they're natural? They come from underground streams, right? Or do all rivers come from the ocean? They come from the runoff from mountains, or from springs, and lakes come primarily also from both, right? Lakes come from, well, we're not really talking about lakes, but I was just
by rivers, so the question is where's the river come from?
So, and it depends, I guess, on the particular river and the particular, right, whether it's primarily coming from the underground or from the mountains or from the rain, or is it?
But I think my guess would be that rivers that are fed by springs are not as,
strong and not as powerful. Okay, so that's important to know. Okay, so anyway, because we'll see why it's going to have a very relevant mikvah question. So Shmuel says rivers ultimately get more of their mitbarech, are blessed, get more of their water from the underground springs. And even if it's a heavy rain, it doesn't say it here, but in another place it says it, every drop that comes above is met with 2 drops from below. So somehow Shmuel understood that even when it rains, that helps draw up the water from below, but its primary source is the underground springs. Now, the reason all of this is relevant, we'll read it in a minute, but I'll just tell you now, is there's a principle that a mikvah, collected rainwater, is only metaher ba'ash boren, is only metaher with sort of settled, unmoving water. whereas rivers and other sort of natural bodies of waters, are lakes, rivers, etc., are even if it's like naturally standing water, like a lake, but anything that ultimately comes from the ground is mitaher bezochalim, is a good mikveh even if the water is moving. So the question is, what is a river? Is a river fundamentally a natural a body of water that comes from the ground, from a wellspring, or is it a body of collected rainwater? And if the majority of the water in the river right now is rainwater, which would include also runoff of melted snow, so from what I'm hearing from all of you, that actually is very high occurrence in terms of rivers, then you've got a big problem, because rivers run and they're moving, but if their majority is rainwater or melted snow, halachically they're a mikvah. They're not a mayim chayim. They're not considered something that comes ultimately from a live source from below. Okay, so that's going to be very relevant. So Shmuel's statement that every drop of rain from above is met with 2 drops from below will say that a river never has the status of a mikvah, always has the status of mayim chayim, and therefore you can always use it if it's running. But if you say that no, that's not true, and that often a lot of the water comes from the rain or the snow, then you're going to have to judge where this river's waters are from if you want to be able to use it as a mikvah, right? Because it's running water.
This is all cycle anyway. Even water that comes from underground sources is ultimately, I think, through absorption through the ground.
Really? It originated underground.
Come from?
Because when God created the world. I'm saying the world was created with water in the oceans and water underneath the ground.
They would be
right, so ultimately, so that is true. So you're saying that they get replenished ultimately from rainwater that's seeping back in. Yeah, I think somehow once it gets like absorbed into the ground and gets back in, it gets like it's sort of like a lot of a katan shenola dummy type of point at a certain stage. That's true. Okay, anyway, so the Gemara says the Amar Shmuel. Okay, so please Shmuel. This statement of Shmuel that the majority comes from below argues on another statement of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel says ein hamayim mitarim bezochalim. Water, you cannot use water if it's running, if it's moving. Ella, you see, you thought we might not have finished it, got done with today's talk. Ella, and it's not like the Gemara is so difficult. It's just that the Ran has a big discussion about the halachic implications. Ella praspi yomi tishrei bilvad. The only type of river you can use which has moving water is the Euphrates during Tishrei, during the fall. Why? Because the argument would be that at any other time other than Tishrei, we would have to be afraid of either melted snow or of rainwater. I guess in the spring you have the melted snow issue, and the fall and winter you've got the rain issue. So the only time where you don't have to be afraid about rain and melted snow, whatever, is Tishrei. But any other time, he says, we've got to, it might be considered majority rainwater, and you can't use it as moving water. So this argues on his earlier statement, right? Because his earlier statement said, we can always assume that more of the water comes from below. And this statement is saying that that's not the case. So we now have the second statement of Shmuel and the earlier statement of Rav Amarav, which basically say, sometimes a lot of the water in rivers is from rainwater, which would mean you can't use them as a mikvah if that might be the case. And now we're actually going to see a practical implication of this by Shmuel's father. Avua de Shmuel's father, Avid lo mikvos lebante biyomei Nisan. He made for his daughters mikvahs in the springtime, because the springtime is when the snow would melt and the majority of the water in the rivers would be rainwater or snow water, and therefore the rivers could not be used. So then they would have to use a mikvah. Okay, umaftsi biyomei Tishrei, and only during the Tishrei, or maybe it means the whole fall season, where the rivers could be used because the majority was not from rainwater. So there they were using the river. So he made for them mats. Why do you make for them mats? Because who wants to actually go in a river and get your feet on the rocks and in the mud and so on? Number one, it's a chatzitza problem, and two, it just might be a slippage problem or getting your feet cut by the rocks. Okay, so basically they would use the rivers only in Tishrei when they did not have to be concerned about rainwater or snow. And it was only when they were, and in all other times, they would have to use mikvah. So obviously you can imagine this is a big nafkamina, right? If somebody basically tells you, I'm going somewhere and there's not going to be any mikvah, what can I do, etc. The natural thing is to say, well, are there natural bodies of water? Okay, but then first of all, if there's a lake, you better find out if it's not a man-made lake, because there definitely are some big lakes that are man-made lakes. And if it's if it's an ocean, but if it's an ocean or a natural lake, you're pretty good. I mean, again, I think it depends. Some lakes actually, depending on the time of year and depending on the lake, might actually have this issue of rainwater. But lakes also are stationary; they're not moving, right? And the question is, what do you do with like a little bit of the little wavy type of stuff that happens? But anyway, so I'm not giving a psak, obviously, but as a general rule, waves and oceans, you're fine if the lake isn't man-made. But rivers are a big issue because rivers are moving, and very often it might be in the majority coming from rainwater or melted snow. Okay, so that's the big Ron. The discussion in the Ron is a couple of things. First of all, the Ron also wants to know about even if it's not like it's a very high level of the water, the Ron says you might, even if it's a normal sort of water level, you might have to be concerned that it's from snow or rain if it's a type of river that often is dries up. Okay, maybe this is relating to the things you guys were saying, meaning if a river often dries up, right, and then so it might get to normal levels, but even at like a not strong level, even a normal level might be because of the rain and of the melted snow. I guess it's what you're saying. The river would dry up if it primarily is not coming from the underground. So then even at a normal level, you would have to be concerned that it might be from the rain or the snow. That's one point he makes. The other big discussion he makes is how do we paskin? Rabbeinu Tam tried to paskin like what seems to be a very minority voice here, Shmuel, that says that even when it rains heavily, you can assume it's coming from the underground. But the Ran and like almost all the Rishonim just say, no, that's clearly not true. Clearly we paskin that if there's any concern that it might be coming from rainwater or melted snow and it's moving water, you have to be concerned about that. Okay, so that's number one. How do we paskin? And then he has a second possibility of being makil, which is, he says, maybe it depends. Maybe you could be makil the following way, that if even when, like if here's my river, right? If here's my river, okay, here's my river during when it's not when it's just normal and it hasn't been raining and not melted snow and so on, okay, and now because of the extra rainwater, right? That was all this rainwater, right? Somehow that makes it go. I don't know, like that makes it go even to places it wouldn't have gone before. Does that happen? Like it gets pushed into tributaries or somehow tributaries? Anyway, so he says like this. He says there is a position that says that the part that you can't use because it's running water that's now a majority rainwater is this section. Is the section that wouldn't have been a mikveh were it not for the additional rainwater. But this section, which anyway would have been kosher without the additional rainwater, even though now it's a majority rainwater, it doesn't passel this section from being used. Okay, so yeah, you get it? Meaning it is true. Now you do have a majority rainwater, but it's like, who needed you? Who needed the rainwater? This would have been kosher without the rainwater, and this would have been a mikveh without the rainwater that could have been used while it was running. So that's another possibility of maybe being lenient, and he has a long discussion about that. Okay, but that's some of what this long length of the Ran is. But as I said, the Gemara itself is not that conceptually difficult to understand. It's pretty important in terms of as far as halach is concerned. Okay, let's read a little bit more, and we'll finish today's daf. Get off easy today. It's a little bonus for a vacation, for your 4th of July vacation. Okay, Amar Rabbi Ami Amar Rav, what's meant by the pasuk? Ve'ata ben adam aseh lecha klei gola, make for yourself vessels of the exile. Zo ner v'ka'ara, this is a candle and a plate. Like, what do you take when you're sort of going on a camping? What do you take when you're going into exile? So what are the minimum vessels that you need? So a candle and a plate, v'shatiach, and a mat, something to go to sleep on as you're going to be traveling and you're not going to be having a bed, I don't know why you don't also need like a tent to protect you from the elements. Anyway, b'choser kol, so now in a similar sense, we're sort of saying, so anyway, what is this doing here? We should first mention that. What does that have to do with anything? So some say the real gears is not Amar Rav Ami Amar Rav, it's Amar Ravin Amar Rav. So it's a series of statements of Ravin Amar Rav. Right? The first Ravin Amar Rav was from before, which was, I think, God is on the head of the sick person. And then it's Ravin Amar Rav about the Euphrates from the rain that's in Bavel. And now I'm from the rain that's in Eretz Yisrael. And now it's Ravin Amar Rav just interpreting this pasuk. Okay, so these three, at least at the face of it, have nothing to do with one another. Okay, so now that we're talking about what are like some minimum things that are necessary for survival, so here we look in the Klal and Dvarim where it says b'choser kol, that you will be lacking everything. So what does it mean to not have anything? Amar Rabbi Ami Amar Rav, below ner you won't even have a candle, below shulchan and not a table. Rav Chizda Amar below isha, without a wife. Rav Sheshes Amar below shamash, without a attendant. So I keep on telling all of you that nobody has signed up yet to be my shamish. So that's an open plus audience. B'choser kol. Okay, Rav Nachman Amar below deya, without intellect. If you don't have intellect, you've really got nothing. Tanu, we've done the brisa below melach, without salt, which is necessary to preserve or give a little taste of things, or below revav, and without something to dip something, and without some oil to dip your bread in. Okay, and Amar Rabbi says naktina, and we take the position ein ani ela b'deya. To really what being poor means, it's sort of like Ezu Ashir Hasameach Bechelko. What really being poor is, it's about it's like it's one could say like the poor is about a state of mind. Okay, I mean, does it mean poor means it's about like being not having intellect? Or does he mean even being poor? You know, the whole statement, the whole famous story, right, about this guy that was suffering so much, and he says to the Rabbi, how am I supposed to, get by? Like, I have nothing. My life is so miserable. He says, go see this following, tzaddik or whatever, and he goes to this person and he sees, how miserable he is, covered in scabs, and has nothing. He says, I don't understand. How are you able to be happy with all these bad things that have happened to you through your life? And he says, I don't understand. Nothing bad has ever happened to me in my life. So I told that story very quickly, and I didn't have the punchline. But the point being, it's all about a state of mind. Okay, I'm not sure if that's exactly what he's saying. That's all about a state of mind, or he's saying no. What it means to be poor is to not have, the intelligence. If you have intelligence, you can figure out how to manage, how to get through life and manage everything else. And if you don't have intelligence, then you're really going to have trouble. Okay, El B'deya, B'maravi Amar Dadabe Kulabe. If you have intelligence, you've got everything. The low dabe, if you don't have intelligence, mabe. Then what do you have? Okay. The ikani, dakani machaser. If you acquire this intelligence, then you won't be lacking anything. Da lo kani, and if you don't acquire this, makani, then what is good? Anything that you would have acquired. Okay, so all similar to Ezu Ashir Sameach Bechelko, right? Within that type of a genre are these statements. Okay, we will continue with this tomorrow on the real July 4th and the real Shivas B'Tammuz.